Okay, we're rolling.
Thank you. Today's date is July the 3rd, 2014. This is Bill Welge for the Oklahoma Historical Society. And today we're interviewing David Lee Wilson, who is with the Oklahoma Historical Society in security, but has worked for the Edmond Police Department and the Oklahoma City Police Department at various times. David, when were you born? Give me your exact full birth date.
I was born June the 26th of 1958.
And were you born here in Oklahoma City?
Yes, I was.
And were you born at...
I was born at the old St. Anthony's Hospital
Okay.
in downtown Oklahoma City. That is no longer there.
No longer there. And your parents, and give me their full given name and dates of when they were born, if you can recall, and if they're still living or if they're deceased, if you have a death date for them.
My parents are still living.
Good.
My dad's name is Charles Frank Wilson, and he was born December the 10th of 1929.
Okay.
And my mother's maiden name was Webb, Charlene May Webb, and she was born October the 30th of 32.
1932. Okay.
Yes.
Were they both born here in Oklahoma City?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, my father was born in Bodine City, which is now part of Valley Brook,
Oh, okay.
and he was born at home on an oil lease.
So he was, at the time, that was when the big oil boom was going on in southeast Oklahoma City.
Correct.
Because that came in about 1928 and it was still going great guns in 1929. So,
Correct.
So that means that your grandfather, was he,
He was an electrician.
electrician? So was he working in the oil field at
Yes,
the time?
he was.
Oh, cool. So that's kind of a neat association with some of Oklahoma City's history. Now you attended Prairie Queen Elementary School.
Correct.
What years were you there at Prairie Queen?
From 64 until 69.
69, okay. And then Jefferson, you were at Jefferson Middle School, or Jefferson Junior High as they called it then.
Correct. And I had planned to spend my sixth grade year at Prairie Queen, but that was right after Judge Bohannon here in Oklahoma City signed the Integration Act, and so the busing was started. And so my sixth grade year was moved to Jefferson Junior High.
Oh, it was?
And so I spent 6th, 7th, and 8th grade at Jefferson.
Okay, so you didn't have to go north side at all?
No, sir.
Okay, well that's interesting because I know some who were in elementary school in south side ended up going north side to black schools to make the integration possible, and those were very contentious years. I don't know if you remember that or not, or have any memories of any of that going on, but it definitely was a very contentious time period in the Oklahoma City public school system.
Yes.
Did you have any favorite teachers at Prairie Queen that stand out in your mind? And what were some of your favorite subjects besides recess and perhaps lunch?
You can look at me and tell me lunch was always one of my favorite episodes.
Me too.
But Mrs. Pritchard is the teacher that stands out in my mind, and the principal, Mr. Cruz.
Mr. Cruz?
And
R.C. Cruz?
I believe that was his name.
Okay.
And he's no longer with us.
Right.
And I also had a teacher by the name of Mrs. Jones that I had in 3rd grade. And I'm reaching back. There's a lot of water that's gone underneath the bridge since then.
What grade was Mrs. Pritchard? Which teacher?
Mrs. Pritchard was 4th grade.
4th grade? Okay.
And Mrs. Jones was 3rd grade. Mr. Stuckwish was 5th grade.
Okay.
Those are the ones I remember.
All right. And Prairie Queen wasn't all that far from Jefferson. It was just a few blocks, really, wasn't it?
Actually, Prairie Queen is located at 66 and Blackwelder, and Southwest 66 and Blackwelder, and Jefferson Junior High is located, it starts in the 6700 block of South Blackwelder. So they're just
You,
basically around the corner from each other.
so you weren't very far, didn't have to go very far. At one time, I read where Prairie Queen Elementary was at the corner, northwest corner of Southwest 59th and Western, and then they moved it. So anyway, that's little incidental.
Well,
History there.
and to tie in it even closer, we attended Southwest Baptist Church at 59th and Western. That's no longer there. It's now a parking lot. And some of our Sunday school rooms were the old Prairie Queen schoolrooms.
Yeah. So yeah, because I remember that church was there for many, many years, but it took over, I guess, when they moved and built Prairie Queen, where it's currently located and where you attended in the 1960s. Now, you were born in Old St. Anthony. What line of work did your father do, and was your mother a stay-at-home mom?
I was raised in a Wally and Beaver world. My dad was an electrician. My mom stayed at home. She took care of me and my sister. I have one sister, and that was the world I knew growing up. We literally, since we lived across the street from the school, behind Jefferson Junior High, there was Taylor Park that had a swimming pool.
Mm-hmm.
At 64th and Western, there was a skate land, and it's still there. And after they built those two, they built a putt-putt golf course that was at the corner of Southwest 72nd and Western. So during the summer, we had plenty to do.
I see. And it kept you busy then.
Yes, and like I said, living across the street from a school, we always, I could leave my house, ride my bicycle to Prairie Queen, and there was always kids, and we'd play pickup baseball games, kickball, whatever.
Well, now, when you made the transition from elementary to junior high, and of course in sixth grade at Jefferson, do you recall who your teacher was at that time, or in the sixth grade?
I really don't, because sixth grade they changed it where we had a teacher for each subject.
Oh, okay.
And so we did not have one teacher like you do at elementary school that I was used to.
Okay.
We changed, we had periods where you'd have English one period, and you'd have science another period, and you'd have math the next period. And
as soon as the bell rang, you had to make way to your next classroom.
correct.
Okay. Do you have any fond memories of that time period, or did you have any issues while you were there?
No, it was the first time that I attended school with people of the Afro-American race, and we didn't have any problems. And after a certain amount of time, it just became like it was nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They just rode a bus to school where we walked to school.
I see. Well, and there was always that apprehension in that time period that there might be problems, and there were some. Not to say that there weren't, but it's good that you didn't encounter any in elementary school. And I think that they were just the students who were bused in were probably just as apprehensive, because that same time period in the early 70s, my last semester at Grant, I was shipped to Capitol Hill. And Capitol Hill and Grant do not like each other, as you well aware.
Well, and you got to throw Southeast in the mixture. They really didn't get along with either one of us.
Right. So but I never had any trouble, thankfully, and we got along just fine, and that worked out. But and since we mentioned Grant, when did you start attending U.S. Grant High School?
Had been in 72 because I graduated in 76.
Okay.
And so some of my dates might be off on my education. I apologize for that. I'm not a mathematician. But I know I started Grant in 72 and I graduated in 76.
Okay, so who was the principal? Do you recall who the principal was?
At Grant, when I attended, it was Mr. Diggs.
Diggs, okay. Because Clarence Huffman, who had been there for 18 years, retired in '71 when apparently we wore him out, and he was a former boxer, and if there was a kid who thought he was tougher than Mr. Huffman, he'd take him to the gym, and they'd put the gloves on, and he said, "Okay, take your best shot." They wouldn't let you do that today, but back then that was apparently acceptable, and the kid usually came out on those short end of the stick.
Yeah.
But and of course you had the same situation with changing in classes with high school and it being a much larger environment as far as students. We were still at that time period a large influx of student body with I guess the growth of South Oklahoma City, and so do you have any memories of any of the teachers that you had while at Grant?
I was sitting here thinking again, and my dad came to me when I was about 14 and said, if you want to drive by the time you're 16, you need to get a job. And so I literally went to work at age 14 at Winchell's Donuts. That was at 54th
Oh,
in
oh,
Western,
yeah,
or maybe 56th in Western.
yeah.
And so I did school. I was an average student, and then I went to work, and I worked at TGMY's, worked at the Sirloin Stockade. Luckily, I had quit Sirloin Stockade there at 74th and Western about 4 years, or 74th and Penn. About 4 years before Roger Dale Stafford walked through the back door and killed everyone in the freezer.
Yeah, and I had a good friend who recently passed away a couple of years ago who switched days off with a young girl who was one of those who was killed in the Sirloin Stockade. So that was one of the most brutal murders in South Oklahoma City that we can recall. And so did you work at the TGNY at 74th and Penn?
Actually, I started off at the TGMY that was at 44th and Western in the old Reading Square.
Reading, okay.
It's now been torn down, and it's part of the parking lot for Southern, the Integris, South Integris
Community
Hospital.
Hospital, okay.
Yes, sir. And then I went to work for the TGMY Automotive at 74th and Penn. That was a freestanding automotive store, which was about 100 yards to the east of the Sirloin Stockade where the murder happened.
Mm-hmm. How long did you work at the TGNY in Reading?
I worked there for about a year and a half.
And what did you do?
We were stock boys.
Stock boy?
And on the weekends we were cashiers.
Okay. And in Winchell's, I guess you made donuts and
Actually, I went in after hours and cleaned
up.
up.
Okay. And per hour rate at that time was?
Well, Winchell's, since I was underage, I worked for $1 an hour.
$1 an hour, okay. And when you started working at TGNY, do you recall what the?
Whatever minimum wage was at the time. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
It was probably about $1.60, $1.70 an
Probably.
hour
Probably.
at that time period. Oh, those were the days.
They were. They were.
Well, now, how did you become interested in police work? I mean, what sparked your interest after you graduated from high school, and then you went on to Central State University at the time? Was that when you began to realize you had an interest in that kind of line of work?
Well, we had a shooting at Grant my senior year where Randy Truitt was shot and killed.
And was he white or black?
Randy was white. It was during one of our race riots, and I became acquainted with a couple of the police officers up there, just in passing, and I thought it would be kind of a neat job. And I was a fan of the show Adam 12,
Mm-hmm.
and I liked Pete and Malloy, and I thought this would be a neat lifestyle,
Sure.
to raise a family with. And so after I graduated from Grant, I went up to UCO, and it was about 2 weeks before the session started in 1976. And they asked us in high school which colleges would you send your transcripts to, and I chose UCO, OU, and OSU. They're the all in-state colleges that I was familiar with. And so anyway, after speaking with my folks and finding out that they would help me through college if I matched their help, I decided UCO because it was the most reasonable solution for me to go to college. And so I went up to UCO 2 weeks before it started. And if you've ever been to a university 2 weeks before it starts, it looks like a stirred up anthill. And I saw a little lady sitting in her office by herself. And I went up, and I'm sitting here trying to recall her name. I do not recall it. But I knocked on her door, and she invited me in. Turned out to be she was Dean of Students.
Really?
And she helped me pick out the classes that would work for me. She then turned around and entered a slot into each of the classes we had picked. Told me go to enrollment and pay at least $1 so my slot would be reserved. And I took it from there that was where I was meant to be. And she told me to come back every year after that, and she would help me enroll.
Well, how very nice. Yeah, because usually they have counselors, and counselors, I feel like that although they're there to assist you in trying to determine what your goals are to be, sometimes, especially if you're a freshman, I don't know, I can't say for UCO, but I know at OU they would load you down with a number of hours to see if you could stick it out or wash out, and that way they could determine whether you had the ability to stay in college or not. So,
well, I think she did help me enroll, and because I did get the head of the English department as my English professor, Mrs. Altaffer.
okay.
And coming from Oklahoma City's public schools, I was very weak in the English study. And so Mrs. Altaffer took me underneath her wing, and I would go into her office an hour before class started, and she literally tutored me through that class, and I was fortunate enough to make a C.
I think that's the universal condemnation of Oklahoma City public school system. I had similar situations. I think many students had that, and they were ill prepared to go to college. And we're talking 40 years ago, and they're still having that issue today.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's sad. It's a systemic problem with the system of, whether it's the educators or the curriculum they're teaching or whatever. It appears that the Oklahoma City public school system does not properly prepare the students for their life goals, in my opinion.
English, I totally agree with you. And I think that's where our public schools are trying to make up some ground. And what I mean by that is my kids, they tested above the normal. And so even Oklahoma City has honor classes. And so if a student is willing to put forth the effort, they do now have classes to help those students.
That's good.
But that's the way I've looked at it from the outside. Now, I've never been part of the educational system, but looking in as a parent, I can see maybe that's why they developed these honor classes.
Because there are some students who are particularly sharp and shouldn't be held back with those who are struggling,
Correct.
so to speak. And I struggled.
Oh, I struggled all the time.
So I think it's and I'm not trying to fault the teachers at
No.
all. I think that they have a huge responsibility, and they do the best they can with what resources they have. and if they're not given the resources, they can't do very much. But
That's very correct.
so, but be that as it may, so you, what kinds of classes besides English at UCO did you take that would prepare you for eventually getting into police work?
Well, it was explained to me by Mrs. or not Mrs. Altaffer. I wish I could remember that lady's name. But she explained to me that you'd have to take your basics before you can start taking your major classes.
Sure.
You'd have to take all these basics. So my first 2 years, I just loaded up on my basics. I thought, might as well get these out of the way. I got to take them. I don't want to. It's history, humanities. In fact, I took humanities, and I really enjoyed the class. There again, I forget the teacher's name, but I took him for Humanities 1 and 2 on purpose because he brought history alive. It's the first time I became aware of history.
Was that Royce Peterson?
No.
Jim Baker?
Keep going.
There was a Herman Fulgraf.
He was head of the department later on.
Well, I just know that Royce Peterson was one of the finest when I was there, so that's why I suggested him. But Don Green.
I'm sorry.
That's
I'm
all right.
sorry.
Well, I can't remember them all, but I know they had some good ones there, and they were very highly qualified and did a superlative.
I know he divorced his wife, and
Sounds like Don Green.
it might be Don Green. Now.
So, but he was a good professor,
Yes.
and he's still living, by the way.
Is he?
He lives in Florida, and we keep in contact with each other. So he was a good friend of mine. So you progressed through. You got past the fundamentals of getting your core classes out of the way, and then I know that UCO kind of excels at criminal justice in a variety of ways. And of course, they now have the forensic lab for OSBI on campus, which is a kudos for them. And it's really a nice building. I just recently saw it for the first time a few weeks ago. So they've really made it a point to kind of fill that niche that none other universities around the state aren't really fulfilling, so to speak. So, so when you began to really concentrate on your degree in criminal justice, what you recall some of the classes and any of the teachers or?
I remember Dr. Parker. He had been a police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he was a professor now at UCO. Mark Woodward. He taught some of the criminal justice classes.
Isn't he over the Oklahoma Narcotics Bureau today?
No, it's a different Woodward.
Okay.
Completely different Woodward.
Okay.
But I was sitting there those are the only two professors that I really recall.
Okay.
I'm very terrible with names. You really have to make me mad at you to remember your name, or I have to like you to remember your name. And unfortunately, my filing cabinet's getting a little full up here.
Yeah, okay.
And so as I remember more names, other names fall out of the filing cabinet.
I understand. When did you graduate from UCO?
Actually, I made straight A's 2 semesters when I started my major classes, and my parents said, "We'll put you up at the university we'll help you live on,
So up until that time, you were commuting?
Yes,
then?
I was commuting
Okay.
back and forth from the south part of Oklahoma City to Edmond. And so I moved up there for a semester, and during that semester, it was the start of my senior year. I'm trying to remember how this worked. It might have been the start of my junior, or the semester after I took the first semester of my junior year. My parents helped me move up to UCO.
I see.
And while I transferred from the TGNY that was there at 74th and Penn, and I transferred to the one that was at 15th and Broadway in Edmond. and I still worked in the automotive section, and basically I was a cashier, so that way in between customers I had time to study for my
I
classes.
see. Well, that was convenient. And that was also gracious of the company to allow you to do
Oh,
that, too.
TGNY was a wonderful company. When I was started changing the wool for them, and I told them I would be going to college, and I needed a job where I could maybe sit down and study. And I said, I know y'all's are very, very limited. Well, they had just fired a girl for stealing money from their cashier's office, and they knew I was a criminal justice major, and so Sam Roberts, he was my manager at that little freestanding automotive, so he moved me in. He said, this way I can keep a great employee, you can study, and I don't have to worry about my money. And so it was a real good win-win situation for everyone.
Good. Good.
And so when the time came, they let me transfer. I transferred and to 15th and Broadway. Like I said, Jerry Seaton was the manager, and he welcomed me with open arms. And while I was there in Edmond, living on campus, I also worked part-time for the university. I cleaned the little infirmary where you went if you was sick, and the security building,
I
the
see.
little security office.
I want to backtrack for just a second.
Okay.
I didn't mean to kind of brush over the incident at Grant with Randy Truitt. Did you happen to see what happened, or were you in class when it happened, or was it before or after school? Can you give me some of the circumstances, if you can recall what went on?
Well, what happened was I was at the opposite end of the school. My sister was in the classroom right in front. She literally had to step over Randy Truitt's body to get out of her classroom. And I found my sister, and we left. And but it was, like I said, there had been a core group of individuals that were bused from the I cannot remember the name of the project, but it was over at about not Crooked Oak. It was over about Southwest 15th and I-240, Kerr Village.
Okay.
And they had been bused to Capitol Hill for a couple of years. Capitol Hill had some problems. They sent them the next year to Southeast, and they had problems, and so they sent them to Grant. And we had several race riots where just fights broke out. And then like I said, my senior year, we had that one where it was, windows were being broke out, and the school was being ransacked, and I was not in the hallway where the shooting happened. Like I said, I was in class, probably a hallway away from where the shooting happened.
Was he an innocent bystander, or was he participating, or do you know from conversations?
All I know is from conversations is that his books were spilled out of his arms as he fell to the hallway. So, in my opinion, he was not involved in the riots.
Okay, so he was an innocent bystander then.
Correct.
Okay. I didn't want to be disrespectful, and I wanted to kind of get some context, because I should have remembered that, but I was in college at the time, and it just eluded me. I may have read it, and it just went right out of my head, but I'll have to do some further study on that. But you're the first person that has ever brought this up, so.
Now you want to jump forward a few years?
Yeah, let's, once you get, once you graduated from UCO and you received your degree, what did you do?
Well, remind me that I wanted to jump forward earlier. We'll go ahead and talk about what you just brought up.
Okay.
As I was working for the university and for the TGNY, during the summer break, I had to work a practicum at a law enforcement agency. And so, as I was going to summer school, my parents were gracious enough to help me stay up there that summer. I went over to the Edmond Police Department to see if maybe they could use a practicum student. And they had a place in their pawn shop where I would go through pawn records looking for stolen articles. And so they went ahead and had me fill out a basic application, made sure I was okay, and I had just, well, I was going to turn 21. My birthday was rapidly approaching, and so they approved me to work as a practicum student for them. And just as I was about ready to turn 21, I get a call from Bill Hensley, the chief of police for the city of Edmond, and he says one of our recruits has dropped out of the academy and it starts in a couple of weeks. We've already done your background, we already have all your paperwork. Would you be interested in the position? And so I said, can I talk to my parents about this? And I want to talk to my professors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went and talked to my professors, and they all agreed to, if I went to the police academy, that they would let me take an incomplete and that I could come back and finish the required paperwork, and I could go ahead and keep the hours. They would help me keep the hours. They wouldn't show as an incomplete on my transcript. And so there's a little nurse that cleaned or that worked in the infirmary, and I went in and told her my dilemma, and she said, "Well, David, you have no responsibilities. You're not married. You have no bills. I once was in this place. I didn't take advantage of the opportunity." And she said, "I always regretted it." And so my parents told me no, but after speaking with this nurse, I went ahead and accepted the position. So 2 weeks after I turned 21, I was in a police academy.
And how long was the academy? And I know that's where a lot of basic training, it's like military basic training, and getting in condition and learning about different aspects of police work. Kind of take us through that.
Well, back in those days, there's only 3 cities that had academies, and it was Oklahoma City, and it was Norman, and it was Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
And Cleat, which is now very involved in police training, basically it was 3 guys that worked in an office at that time. And so Cleat is the Council of Law Enforcement Education and
Training. Okay.
And anyway, these 3 guys, basically they would write up that you had to have so many hours of traffic enforcement. You have to have so many hours of working domestic, so many hours of handcuffing, so many hours of, and so Oklahoma City, since it was so large, and it would put on these schools for these smaller agencies. Like Edmond at the time, I think we had probably 32 officers. And so anyway, they would send their officers to this academy. And so that's where I went to my first police academy. And from what I can recall the most, it was 6 weeks.
6 weeks. Okay.
Self-defense lasted all of about 2 hours. And in that self-defense, basically the laws were different from they are today. Back in those days, you could shoot a fleeing felon. If you stole more than $50 worth of merchandise from TGMY, that was a felony. So basically, you could shoot them. And so, what I remember of our self-defense is if they came at you with their hands, you hit them with a stick. If they came at you with a knife or a stick, you shot them. So that was basically self-defense.
Well, I would think it almost would apply today too. If someone's coming at you with a weapon, with the intent of bodily harm, I know that it's a snap judgment decision what you have to do, whether to shoot a person or whatever. It's not an easy thing to do.
Well, the laws have changed drastically. You can no longer just shoot a fleeing felon. You have to have your life endangered or someone else's life endangered before you can use deadly force.
I see.
That's why they've come out with tasers. They've come out with pepper spray. They have come out with these expandable batons because you have degrees of forcing that you that you can use against the force that's being used against you.
Mhm.
And so the laws have changed dramatically in that area.
Once you completed the training academy, were you able to get on to the police force in Edmond?
Well, technically, before you're sent to the academy, you've already been hired by the city that's sending you to the academy, because they are paying you a salary, plus
Okay.
they're paying whatever the Oklahoma City required from the city for the use of their officers to train you.
Okay.
And so uh, you're you are hired as a police officer. You go off to this school. Based upon your scores, you either successfully graduate from the school, and if you do, and this included firearms training, you're now a commissioned police officer in the state of Oklahoma for this city. And so what that means is, like, I now have, I can work as a police officer within the city limits of Edmond.
Now, is this what they mean by CLEAT certified?
Yes, because they met the minimum requirements of CLEAT, and you've also met the requirements, like when I went to Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City's academy, when I quit Edmond and moved to Oklahoma City, CLEAT might say you need 20 hours of practice out on the range. Well, in Oklahoma City, they would quadruple it. You get 80 hours out on the range. That's what a lot of your larger municipalities do, is they'll take the minimum and really reinforce it, because they want to train you for every scenario that you might encounter as a police officer.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that you can encounter in this day and age.
Oh yeah, we'll get into those later.
Well, now, were you at Edmond when the Patrick Sherrill had the post office massacre?
No, sir, that happened during the time span that I had left Edmond to develop my business with my
Okay.
partner. I can tell you an interesting story about that.
Okay.
There was a officer that was on our department. I won't tell his name, but his mother was always after him to get a safe job like his brother, and so he ended up quitting, and he went to work in the private world. But his brother, Mike Rockney, was the first one killed in the Edmond Post Office massacre.
Well, that's, I know that was probably one of the largest single day tragic incidents in the history of Edmond.
Yes.
And never has not been equaled, thankfully, but it certainly was very devastating to the community, I'm sure.
But that's where the term "going postal" was coined.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay. The so, how long did you stay with the Edmond Police Department before you moved to Oklahoma City?
I stayed with Edmond from '79 to '85 and went out into the private world. That's when the health insurance started costing. And so I went back to the city of Edmond in '88, or maybe '87. And since I already had experience with Edmond, they was needing a traffic officer. So I was selected for that position. And basically we worked serious injury accidents and accidents with death. And so that's where I went.
Now, Edmond was it's always been considered a bedroom community of Oklahoma City and a college town, but it certainly has mushroomed in population in the last 20-25 years. And was it still fairly small when you were there?
When I was working for the city of Edmond, even in when I left in '90, Santa Fe was still a 2-lane street, which now it's 4 and 5 lane in places. Bryant was still 2-laned. Your main roads were Boulevard, Broadway, and Kelly. In places was still dirt. And I think Oak Tree came in about '84, and that was considered out in the country.
Okay. Well, that shows you the dramatic growth that the community has seen over the last year.
Lake Arcadia.
Yeah. Yeah.
wasn't even formed
Yeah, it was
until what, 86 or 87?
sometime later, yeah.
Because that's when the city of Edmond started acquiring the land and building it.
Well, now, you had the private business, and what was that?
It was a video rental store, Randy's M&M's, and we started off at 15th and Broadway, and then we moved to our original store at 33rd and Broadway, and then we opened up one in downtown Oklahoma City in the tunnels, and we then expanded to Edmond Road Edmond Road and Santa Fe, and then we had one over in Bryant Square. And when we eventually closed the one in Bryant Square and moved it over on about Danforth and Chowning.
And because that was, video was quite popular at the time. It must have been a thriving business for a time.
It was, but now the videos has gone to the wayside.
It sure has. So, when did you return to the police work?
It was November of 1987, right before my son was born, and I went back, and I really missed the camaraderie of the small town, and I thought, well, I'll go back into police work. Some of the guys were after me to come back, and I went back, and what made me leave the city of Edmond was Oklahoma City passed that sales tax increase in 1989, and their salaries doubled.
Oh.
And I went home and talked to my wife. We both agreed that she should stay at home when the kids were small. I worked every security job, I worked every off-duty job I could work so I could keep my wife at home. And I said, honey, what do you think? I said, I can do the same thing for Oklahoma City that I'm doing for the city of Edmond. We'll make twice the money. And she said, well, think about it. And if you think it's the right move, I'll stand behind you.
Which broached the question, and I failed to ask it. When did you marry?
I married in 1983.
And your wife's name?
Her maiden name, her is Barbara Jean Gibson. And we married in August of '83.
Okay. And she's a native of Edmond or Oklahoma City?
Actually, she was military. Her father was military, and so she was born at Nellis Air Force Base in Vegas.
Okay.
And then they moved to Germany, and she told me the town, but it escapes me. And then they stayed over there through probably her second or third grade, and then they moved to Offutt, is that in Nebraska, a big Air Force base, and her dad he was a fighter pilot in World War II, and so he had been in the Air Force, and they said that he was going to get orders to go to Vietnam, and he said, I don't think so, and retired. And they moved to Pryor, Oklahoma, because that's where his mother lived, and his father had just passed away. And because of the economy in Pryor, they came and looked around, and because of Tinker Air Force Base, they settled in Edmond.
Okay. And so, obviously you made the decision to go to the Oklahoma City Police Department, and what was your first assignment there?
Well, after the academy, I went to Patrol Division at Hefner. They had just opened up Hefner Division, which is located basically at Northwest 122nd in Portland.
Okay. And so when you talk about that, it's just patrolling that area of the district?
Well, basically, Hefner Division runs from May Avenue to the city limits west, and from Southwest 15th to the city limits north.
Oh, wow. So that's a pretty sizable area.
Yes, sir.
And I'm sure you encountered all sorts of interesting things. Do you have any interesting stories that, I'm sure there's all sorts of people who tried to get out of speeding tickets and what have you, and so...
Well, I had just been turned loose as a a young police officer in Oklahoma City, and you always get these men with or people with bombs,
Mm.
and they usually turn out to be deals. I mean, 99% of the time you don't really find a bomb. But I get a call, it's in the 500 block of North Meridian, that a guy had just ran out of a business and he had duct tape on his wrist. And he ran to the business next door and said that he needed help. And when I arrived, the man did have duct tape hanging from his wrist, and he was very excitable, which is very understandable. I asked him what was going on. He said that there was another man inside that was an attorney, and there was an individual that had warrants out for him, and several law enforcement agencies were looking for him. And so I said, what was this gentleman's name? He told me. I do not recall it. And so I thought, well, I'll just call this individual at the business next door and see if I can convince him maybe to give up. And so I did call the business next door, spoke with the man for a second, and he says, you don't believe me, do you? And I said, well, before I activate everything I'll need to activate, I just want to make sure we can't work through this situation. And he said, where are you at? And I said, I'm close. He said, where are you at? And I said, I'm not telling you that. He said, well, look out the door if you're close. And about that time, as I looked out the door, he opened up the door to the business he was in, threw out a gray object, and it exploded. So I technically called my supervisors, and we got everybody down there that needed to be. The event lasted through the night. I was sent home when my shift ended at 5. When I came back to work the next morning at 7, I was sent back down there. TAC team made entry and found that the individual had shot himself probably an hour prior to them making entry into the building. The other individual had been taped to a couch, but he was fined.
Okay. So that was kind of a baptism by fire, pretty much, and I'm sure that that's not. There's more
There's
calamity,
more stores.
more stories, of course, and you had a 18-year career with Oklahoma City,
Correct.
and up until, would you say, and I don't mean to demean when I say run-of-the-mill crime, because no crime is not necessarily run-of-the-mill, because you run into armed robbery and larceny and murder.
Well,
and
Bill, you know,
I,
you asked me to tell a story from the start of my career.
Yeah.
You know, it's like my career, I could go war story after war story after war story, probably just like someone that had been in a war overseas. I mean, we caught bank robbers. Like you said, we'd interrupt armed robberies in progress and take people in custody. I was called to, here's a situation where I could have been justified in shooting. You know, I was called to the Fashion Barn. It's located about Reno and MacArthur.
Okay.
It's in there where I first started riding that district. It was just no farmhouse, white farmhouse, and there was wheat fields. Now if you go by, there's a Walmart, there's a Home Depot in there, there's a Home Mall. It runs all the way from MacArthur to Rockwell, right there off I-40. But you know, I get a call, larceny in progress. Employees at the Fashion Barn are watching this lady stuff things into her bag, and so they give the call to me, and it's my district, and so I take off. I get over there to it. I grab my clipboard and ticket book, because I know where I'm going to use both those once I get into the business. As I'm approaching the business, a lady comes running out She fits the description that the dispatcher's given to me. She jumps into a vehicle that's sitting right there in front of the business. Old blue, no, it's a maroon, Olds, some type of Olds. And I run over to the back of the vehicle and slap on the trunk. She looks up. We make eye contact as the vehicle is starting, and I yell at her, "Turn off the vehicle. Let's do this the easy way." Well, she immediately reaches up and grabs the gear shift and hits the gas pedal. I jump on the vehicle next door to it, and she slides her vehicle over as she's coming out of the slot, trying to take my legs off. I somehow, I don't know how it happened. I said, I got paint transfer on my holster from her car.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow I didn't get my legs taken off, but she pulls out. I jump in the black and white. The pursuit's on. We catch her, and she goes to jail for attempting to elude. She had stolen enough clothing for, you know. Now I'm glossing over some of it, but that's basically how it went down.
Well, and no firearms were exchanged.
Actually, as she was trying to take off my legs, I drew my gun. I was getting ready to shoot her, but there was a woman with a small child standing on the sidewalk, and I thought, if the bullet went through the window, went through the lady, came out of the car and killed the little girl, I couldn't live with myself.
Sure.
And so you're making all these judgments in a tenth of a second.
You have to do that every day.
Yeah.
When you're, not only do you have to have mental observation of what's going on at the time, but also making those split-second decisions that are extremely critical
Yes.
in a situation like that. One of the things that you told me and precipitated this interview was that you were involved with the Oklahoma City bombing,
Yes, sir.
while with the Oklahoma City Police Department.
Yes, sir.
And I know that it happened on a Wednesday, because at that time I was off on Wednesdays and heard the explosion, but I thought, since I live in South Oklahoma City, that it was either a plane had gone down at Will Rogers or at Tinker, or there had been a natural gas explosion. And it wasn't until a friend told me to turn on the TV that I found the full extent of what was going on. What can you walk us through your beginning of your day, of your shift, or what happened at that time?
Well, when the bomb went off, I had changed from patrol division to Hefner Impact. And what Hefner Impact is it's a unit that works out of each briefing station. So Will Rogers had an impact unit, Santa Fe had an impact unit, Spring Lake had an impact unit, and Hefner had an impact unit. And basically what this was 6 officers, and you might go to work. Well, we went to work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we would either do drug houses, we'd lay on top of buildings and catch burglars, we'd sit inside of a business because somebody else had information that this business was going to be robbed. We did anything. We went out and did liquor stores for selling liquor to minors. We went out and did convenience stores for them to selling beer to minors. We did everything. And so the day of the bombing, I was assigned to Hefner Impact. And I was home in bed, sound asleep. We had a dog, Heidi. She was a little schnauzer. Heidi woke me up and needed to go outside. And when I went to open up the door, I saw our wind chimes go all the way up to the north side of our patio and come down, and I heard this roar. So apparently my dog had heard something. I don't know what, but she heard something. And I could tell it was an explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And so I immediately, my wife called me and said, "What's up?" I said, "I don't know." So then I called police department and flipped on the TV at the same time. And I saw exactly what you saw. The news 4, 5, and 9 were all turning their tower cams toward the center of Oklahoma City, saying something happened, we don't know what. And so I called our special little number. They said, no, don't come in. We got too many guys already down there. We're going to have to, this is going to be more than a 24-hour ordeal. Hold off. About 30 minutes later, we get a phone call, or I get a phone call again. You're meeting at the training center, be there in 20 minutes.
The training center was?
At 10th and 900 block in North Portland.
Okay.
Where the OCPD Training Academy is.
Okay.
Right there on the west side of the fairgrounds, I-240,
Okay.
or I-44.
Yeah.
So anyway, we go down there, and we assemble. They hand me a video camera and said, we want you to go down there and videotape. And anything that you can as evidence. So I said, okay. So me and my impact crew, we took off.
And there were 6 in your impact crew?
Right.
Okay.
And a supervisor.
Okay.
So we go down. As we're approaching, because no crime scene tape had been set up yet, nothing had been set up. Buildings were still being gone through. And we stopped a couple blocks north and cleared it looked like it had been a restaurant at one time. And that's when we started trying to leave signs that these areas had been searched. As we're getting closer to the Alpha Murrow building, someone said a second device had just been found and the scene was evacuated. Come to find out it turned out to be an ATF training aid, I believe, that was located on one of the floors.
Okay.
And basically, after we came back from that evacuation, we did set up perimeters around the building with our cars. OHP started responding by helping us set up perimeters. Temporary fence was being set up. And from what I can remember, we went back into the building and it was just utter
Destruction.
stop.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's all right.
I just thought about crap.
This is not an easy thing to talk about. And it's entirely up to you, Dave, if you want to wait and we can talk about it.
No other day's gonna be different.
Well, I understand. I know that the memories and the emotions are still very fresh, even though it's almost been 15 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like,
Bill,
being in the war. If you'd been in the war and you were subjected to something,
We're almost 20 years into it, Bill.
20 years. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. Yeah, 95. It'll be 2015. So yeah, 20 years. That's incredible. The time has passed, and I know that you've known people. I know people I've had friends who were in the building who survived, but I also have friends of family members who did not. And it's just extremely sensitive situation.
Yeah. And you think you're over it.
Yeah. And I fully understand. I mean, I can, this is a tough
It's just
topic.
It's just like it's just the totality.
And the senselessness of it
Yeah.
all. And the fact that somebody who had such a hatred for this country,
Yeah.
for Charlie Hanger, who was an OHP patrolman at the time hadn't noticed the license plate missing from
Yeah, Timmy.
McVeigh's car, and now he's the sheriff of Noble County.
Yeah.
We might not have known for days who was one of the perpetrators.
Well, we're getting to that. Okay. I'm better.
All right.
We all cut that out.
Yes,
Okay.
we can cut that out. You ready? Okay.
So as we looked around the destruction, and you see tricycles bent, mangled, we thought, well, we'll start looking for evidence. That's what police officers do. So they're just west of the building. It's still a high-rise place, apartment complex where people can buy their apartments or lease them. We find an axle, and Richie Willis, one of the guys on our unit, says, you know, we might need this. And so we notified the FBI, you know, that we have this evidence. And I think 3 of our unit, Richie and I don't remember the other 2, stayed with that, and us 3 others continued. And that axle later turned out to be very valuable evidence. But basically, the first day, we was, you know, from what I understand, the Oklahoma Restaurant Association was having a meeting at the Myriad. They saw the devastation, and kitchens were set up in the bottom of the Myriad to feed us. But our group, we worked from 10 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, and we took care of anything that needed. Once the feds showed up after about the 2nd to 3rd day, a fence was set up where there's even an inner perimeter where you had to be approved to work in the inner perimeter. I chose never to get that certification to go inside the inner perimeter. We got general duties around to help. Before Terry Nichols was caught, now Tim McVeigh had already been caught. America's Most Wanted came down, and we got the assignment to escort John Walsh around. And so we escorted him around, and then that show later aired the following Friday. He was in like on a Wednesday or Tuesday, but the show that he recorded was shown that Friday.
Well, I know that there was just a huge outpouring of not only the police and fire department, National Guard, the governor declared martial law, but it's my understanding from that time period, and it's the historical record, that even though martial law had been declared, and because all police had been converged, as have fire department personnel down to the site, that really no major crime took place in Oklahoma City for the first few days, which was rather remarkable when you think that people could have taken severe advantage of the situation and could have looted if they wanted to, or created a crime. But I don't recall, and I could be wrong, and you can correct me, that there were no murders, there were no rapes, there were no major burglaries. I think everybody was just glued to their TV sets at that time, wanting to know what was going on.
Well, I think you're correct. Working underneath the microscope as we were, and doing the things that we were doing, seemed like we was doing something down there every 5 minutes. Now, what they all were, I can't recall right now, but if it was, but like you said, the generosity of, I remember walking fence row one day, and an old rusted out Pontiac Bonneville pulled up. White man, white woman in it. Probably 4 or 5 kids throughout the car. He honks. I walk over the fence row. Says, "How can I help you?" He tosses a Walmart bag over. It has some T-shirts and some tube socks in it. He says, "That's all I can afford." That one sticks out in my mind. I know that happened over and over and over.
If there was a call for gloves, there would be an overwhelming supply of gloves. Or if it was, needing booties for the cadaver dogs. And I mean, it just was, the community was engaged to do that.
Yeah.
And I think all the different FEMA squads that came in from around the country, from New York and California and so forth, they've never had experienced anything like that before. That the generosity of the people, and as you say, the restaurant association had already had kitchens set up, so they just went into overdrive with making meals for those who were on site. You had massage therapists there in the Myriad working, for those who were just absolutely worn out and needed to be.
Or just get a break.
Yeah, and I'm sure there was had to be a large contingent of chaplains there to talk, because you can't bottle something that horrific up and not feel something, and because this was the first domestic terrorist attack on U.S. soil.
Especially of this magnitude.
And it was unfathomable for people to even think about. And as horrific as it was, I think that the silver lining, if you can have a silver lining in something of this tragic, is that it put Oklahoma City on the world stage as never before, because you had every imaginable news outlet, major networks from around the country. You had World, you had BBC, you had all the major networks were broadcasting from downtown Oklahoma City, and they were talking about the caliber of the people of Oklahoma City. And Chamber of Commerce couldn't ask for better advertising, I guess, when you think about what the people, whether they knew anybody down there or not,
Correct.
did this, were so generous in what they were doing, like the gym.
It's like one of the things I'm donating to the museum.
Okay.
This poster, and I can bring it over,
Okay.
was sold by Walmart in 1995.
Let me zoom this back out a little bit. Well, he's got it stuck. Let me just move the camera over, and then I'll slowly pan down. This was sold by Walmart.
In 1995.
Okay.
And the proceeds went to help the victims.
I see.
And in this poster, over here on this side, I'm sorry, let me find it. Right in this area right here, you can see the 3 officers walking with
Yes.
impact T-shirts.
Okay.
Okay, I'm the heavier one of the 2, or the 3.
Okay.
And this is the shirt that was in that photograph.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so I'm donating those.
Which we truly appreciate, because the fact that, to me, the single most, if I could sit that back, the single most epic, when you talk about the 20th century in Oklahoma, you had statehood, which was
You need me
significant.
to stop it, or you got any?
Oh, we're continuing.
Okay.
You had statehood, which was a significant event. You had World War I and II that affected Oklahoma, Vietnam, Korea and Vietnam, get it chronologically. Then you had, of course, we had peaceful sit-ins in the late 1950s, 60s during the Civil Rights Movement, which
Yes.
put Oklahoma City in a different category than what happened in Selma, Alabama, or elsewhere. We didn't have those kind of riots. We were unique in that respect. But probably the most, of the 20th century, when you think about epic moments in the community's history, the Oklahoma City bombing has to be number one. Because never before had that occurred. I think that, significant serving on the Murrah Memorial Archive Subcommittee for all these years, I'm still amazed that when 9/11 took place in New York City, the committee that was wanting to develop their memorial came to us. And you think of New York City as urbane and all, more sophisticated than we here in Oklahoma City, and here they're asking for our input and advice. That tells me something. That tells me the caliber of the people, the folks who were involved in trying to get to the perpetrators, get to the bottom, and also get to healing about this whole situation.
Yes.
And how long were you down at the site?
We was down there from day one. Our whole impact unit was down there until they imploded the building
So on May 23rd
on
then.
May 23rd. Now, I did take off that one Sunday just to be with my family because I didn't see much of my kids.
Sure.
And so I took off that Sunday.
Okay. But basically for nearly 5 weeks you were, or almost a month really, you were nonstop, 10
Correct.
hours, 10 or 12 hours a day down on the
Yes.
site. Okay. And when that was over, how did they debrief you? How did the police department deal with such psychological impact? Because it was a psychologically impact situation.
Bill, part of law enforcement's being mentally, physically tough. They offered counseling sessions. I never attended any. The ones that went were laughed at, ridiculed.
Really?
And so I chose not to be laughed at and ridiculed.
And that's sad that they would even. It's kind of in a form bullying in a way to a point, but
It is.
but that's sad because I don't see how you could.
But in the police officer's mind, I've described two encounters to you.
Mm-hmm.
You go 10-8, what you dealt with in the past, gone, you're ready for something else.
Okay. So, and you stayed with the department another 3 years. I think you retired from OCPD about 1998.
2008.
2008. Okay. Oh, so you were there that's right, 18
18
years.
years.
18 years. So, so you had, you've worked in a variety of departments. You were at the Hefner Division. You were undercover.
Mm-hmm. You
and-
have some photos of my undercover work if you'd like to see those.
Oh, sure. What were some of the more interesting? Were they all drug related or gang
No.
related or?
No, actually, we worked, like I said, everything. I got a call from my major one day and said that a friend of J.D. Sharp, which was sheriff of Oklahoma County at the time, his grandson had been arrested on a burglary charge. And that his grandson wasn't really a bad guy, but that he was on that borderline of going to a bad guy, and could I go talk to him? So I went by the Oklahoma City Police Department, looked up what I thought was this kid's record, but
Mhm.
the gentleman's picture that I found underneath this name was 35 years old. Supposedly I was going to interview an 18-year-old kid.
Oh, really?
So I'm thinking, how did this information get confused? So I go to county jail and go to an interview room. They bring this guy down. He walks in. He's a 19-year-old kid. So I know I have the picture of the wrong guy. Come to find out, Oklahoma City hadn't arrested him. Another agency had arrested him. And so that's why his records wasn't at the Oklahoma City Police Department.
I see.
Because Oklahoma County serves all the cities that are in Oklahoma County. So anyway, I get talking to this kid, and he tells me about the dope world. And I said, well, let me go talk to the DA's office, because if I can get you out on an OR bond, which means he promises to show up for court. And back in those days, a police officer could go over to the district attorney's office, say, hey, I talked to this guy that we have in jail. He says he can help me make these drug cases. Can I get him out of jail without him paying any money and him go to work for us? We'll see how the first deal works. If it works out well, I'll report back to you, and you won't, we'll reduce the charges that he was originally arrested for, and we'll work with him through the court system. And so I talked to this young man. We talked for a couple of hours. He tells me about all these wonderful things he can do to help Oklahoma City rid itself of the drug problem. So I go back to the DA's office. I talk to him. They say, oh yeah, you can get him out. We'll help him out. First time offender, nonviolent, we can help this kid if he can turn his life around.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I go back across the street. We get him out of jail. And first drug deal that we went to do, and we went to an apartment complex in Oklahoma City. He goes up to the door, knocks on the door. He's going to just buy a quarter bag of marijuana. The guy, when he comes to the door that lives in the apartment, says, oh, I'm out, but let's go down the hall. So he takes my informant that I just checked out of jail. They go down the hall to a different apartment. They knock on the door. A 19-year-old kid comes to the door, about the age of my informant, and the guy at the door that's with my informant says he's looking for some stuff. He goes, well, I think we're out. Hey, Mom, Dad, somebody's here, Frank is here with a friend trying to buy some stuff. So anyway, they go, well, we're out. So now, Mom, Dad, son, first bad guy, and my informant get inside of a car. They drive to a different complex. My informant, the bad guy, first bad guy, second bad guy, go to bad guy 3 or 4 house. Or, they go up, knock on the door, they're invited in, they buy, what we're looking for, and come back out. Luckily, we had a county sheriff with us, because we felt like this might happen since our jurisdictions meet real quick, or meet right there. So we ended up filing a search warrant on this guy. On Mom, Dad, and son, they went to jail for distribution, and the first guy went to jail for distribution. So out of one deal we took, there was 2 other people in that guy's house that we hit with a search warrant. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 guys off my first deal with this informant.
That's pretty impressive.
And so he turned out to be so good, and I trusted him probably more than I should have. I gave him, because back in those days that was pre-cell phone. The cell phones were in a bag and you put the antenna on top of your car. We had pagers, and a lot of times I didn't hear my pager go off in the middle of the night, and so I gave him my home phone number with explicit instructions only to use it in times of emergency. Well, he calls me one night, said he had been over at a friend's apartment and they had been blowing some weed. And he apologized to me for doing that. But he said these guys got to talking, and they had just burned down a Boy Scout camp south west of Oklahoma City.
Camp Kickapoo?
And so I said, do you know the name of this scout camp? He said, no, I don't. And so I called the Oklahoma City Fire Department arson. Said, did y'all have a fire at a Boy Scout camp around Oklahoma City somewhere? They said, yeah, Camp Kickapoo.
Hmm.
And so I called my informant back up. Said, let's do this. We got a good fire. We need, because he said that he saw evidence in these suspects' home. He said, I can't get too close to these suspects because I just can't. So I said, well, how are we going to do it? So he told me about another old boy that had warrants out for him. So we went and picked up this other guy that had warrants, and we convinced him to work off some of his warrants by buying dope from the bad guys, and then we got a search warrant on their house, and the fire department did file charges on them for the arson.
Hmm.
We laid on top of businesses like that dance hall that is at Reno and Portland that's been there forever. It's an old cowboy joint, but it's pretty large size.
Yeah, okay.
But we laid on top of it, and when people came in to the parking lot and broke windows to steal stuff out of cars, we'd arrest them. Like I said, we would. This kid that I was talking about earlier that helped me do the arson investigation, we would give him money and make sure the only thing he had in his wallet was his Oklahoma driver's license.
Uh-huh.
We'd send him into various convenience stores, and then he would purchase beer. And if they looked at his ID and still sold him the beer, that's when we wrote him a ticket or took him to jail.
Because he was underage.
He was underage, yeah.
Well, being at 19,
Yeah.
he had to be 21.
Yeah,
Okay.
he had to be 21 to purchase beer. We did liquor stores the same way. And so,
And they didn't care. They'd sell. They'd
Right.
rather make the money than,
yeah, if the stores turned them down, we just went on.
yeah.
I mean,
They were following the
they
law.
were following the law. And so we was only after the ones that sold to minors.
Sure.
We even did bars. You
Hmm.
know, we'd send them in to see if they'd serve a minor. So that was one of our ways of doing things.
Well, it sounds like, you shut down a lot of different individuals who were, and unfortunately we have such a drug problem in this country, but also in Oklahoma in general, and being kind of a pipeline, I-35 being the kind of the major pipeline from Mexico or whatever,
Yeah.
South America coming right through the heart of the city, that we're kind of a target, and it's just a never-ending process, I would say.
But I also donated some photos to the History Center. It doesn't show any suspects, but it does show photos of like a drug bust. You know, like where we develop information, go get a search warrant, come back, slam the front door, make entry, put people in cuffs, and in the photos I gave you, there's some marijuana, there's dope, there's money, pills, everything we're looking for.
Do you recall what was your largest bust?
The largest bust I was involved in on one of our search warrants was we got a kilo of cocaine, we got almost $200,000, over 100 pounds of marijuana, and we ended up seizing 2 houses, 11 cars, and some other money from other
my
bank
word.
accounts and things.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That's huge. So, well now, I guess after 18 years in Oklahoma City, kind of doing just a little bit about everything, you decided to have a little less stressful situation,
Correct.
and that's when you came to the Department of Public Service,
Right.
and
Became a security officer.
has that been an enjoyable experience for you?
Since I've been assigned to the History Center, I love it. I love history. Me and my wife, our house is nothing but antiques, and so this is a great place because every time you walk through our galleries, you will see, if you take the time and read all the cards about all the objects. And I haven't even scratched the research side. Me and my wife picked up a book and I thought it was kind of neat, a history of the United States, published in 1918. I do not recall the author's name.
Mm-hmm.
I brought it to the History Center because it had maps in it, and they said they're always looking for historical maps here.
Oh,
And
we are, yeah.
Chad Williams looked through it and said all the maps in it was already on public record, but he said I might check with Patricia Jones about this book. I gave it to Patricia. Patricia researched it and found that this book was banned from the state of New York in 1923 because it put positive light on the Afro-American race. And
In New York.
in New York,
Okay.
and that there's only 32 known copies of this book currently in the libraries. The book is being reproduced, and I probably picked this book up at an estate sale for $1 or $2. Just thought it was neat, and so there's still finds out there.
Oh, yeah.
But it's finding the history of the object that makes it even neater.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we have so many treasures here. It's you know, I won't say it's infinite because we do have a stopping point, but you can immerse yourself in the history very easily, and especially 19th century and early 20th century, where we we were kind of a haven for outlaws. Some of the notorious of all time would find Indian Territory a good place to hide out while so things would blow over. In the 30s we had Pretty Boy Floyd. And I don't know that John Dillinger ever made it down to Oklahoma. He may have, but the film Dillinger that was done in 1974 or 73 was filmed in Oklahoma. Part of it was filmed in Oklahoma City, so at least he was here in the memory.
I told you I was going to regress, or I didn't want to jump ahead when we was talking about Randy Truitt shooting at Grant.
Yeah.
I was a young officer in Edmond. I was working an ASAP shift, which is Alcohol Safety Apprehension Program, where you're looking for drunk drivers.
Mm-hmm.
I stopped a drunk driver, put him in handcuffs, had him in my back seat, older gentleman. I don't recall his first name, but his last name was Truitt. And he said, you'll arrest me for DUI, but you won't arrest the kids that killed my son. And I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Because the boys that shot his son they were tried in juvenile court, given a couple of years. When they turned 18, they were let loose. So it's basically they spent about 2 years in prison for shooting his son.
And that's kind of a poignant, very because and that's been years and years after the fact, and that I'm sure that the law, and that was probably his only son too.
I don't know. I wasn't that familiar with the Truitt family.
Yeah. I'll have to do, some more research, but that's interesting that you had that encounter.
Yes.
And how small, literally, the world is.
But Bill, like I said, I could tell you a lot more war stories. We could go through a lot of stuff. It just depends on what you want to do with this.
Okay. Well, why don't we, at this point, come to a conclusion, and I'm sure there'll be other things that you'll think of and that we'll be interested in, and we'll want to do a follow-up interview. And so I appreciate it very much, Dave, that you gave your time to tell us some of this, because law enforcement, we don't have very much on contemporary law enforcement in our collection, and this is very contemporary and very important. So I thank you.
Thank you.